Making this quilt changed my life. My friend Lily moved in 2 houses down when we were 3 and 4, and we've been close friends ever since. So when she and her then fiance Luke asked me to make a quilt to be the chuppah at their wedding, I immediately started tearing up. In Jewish tradition, a chuppah is a canopy that covers the marriage ceremony, representing the home that the couple will create together. It has no walls, symbolizing that the couple and their new home exist within the very community that surrounds them at the ceremony. Some chuppahs are made of talits, which are prayer shawls, but for the less religious, other family heirlooms such as tablecloths and quilts are common choices. The chuppah is one of my favorite elements of a Jewish wedding ceremony, so to be asked to play such a meaningful role in a dear friend's wedding was a major honor. Today's a big day, but I want to get you caught up on what has happened to get me to this point. So first I used this app called Pre-Quilt to design a couple different options for Luke and Lily to look at. I used the inspiration from my Pinterest board. I made 4 designs. I ultimately ended up just picking 2 of them to show. I also made 4 different colorways or 4 different color options. Likewise, I only decided to show 2 of them to them. I didn't want to overwhelm them with choices, and I was starting to feel overwhelmed. I didn't want to show them 4 different designs with 4 different colorways. It was just going to be way too much. I let them know that the other options existed, but just started just by showing them these 2 options with these 2 colorways. They ultimately picked what was also my favorite, which is very exciting. Before I got to deciding how much fabric I needed, I had to make templates for everything. This is a very complicated quilt. I really made a big project for myself here. This quilt is on the more complicated side because I designed it in an app, not really thinking about what I was gonna have to do in the physical world. So that means I made a bunch of templates. There are so many different triangles that are kind of the same, kind of different. I labeled everything. I drew out what each block had to look like, how many I needed of each color, and therefore how many of each template I needed of each color. There's also a lot of long strips that go throughout the quilt. Some are on the internal part of the quilt and some are the big border. Not to mention all of the strips on the back, because I'm going to do the back like this big log cabin. This is a traditional quilt block called log cabin, but I'm doing it a little bit differently, of course, because I can't do anything. I can't do anything the easy way. I just thought it was so perfect for Luke and Lily to have these L's, kind of these L shapes on the back of the quilt. Math is not my strongest skill, so I outsourced some help. I got my mom to help, and we met on Zoom, and it took us a couple hours, but we figured out exactly how much fabric we needed, and then we had to go back and make some changes that I won't get into. We kind of had to start over, but we didn't really, so that was okay. My mom figured out a way to start over without starting over and solve the problem that we had run into. So I did all of the figuring of exactly how big each piece needed to be, and not just how big it needed to be sewn, but how big it needed to be cut, because you need to cut seam allowance, which for every single piece, I added a 1/4 inch in each direction or a 1/2 inch to every dimension. We mathed that all out to come up with the total amount of fabric that we needed for each color. So once I figured out how much fabric I needed, I went to the fabric store and I just went with my list and I picked the fabrics off the shelf. I knew that they had the brand that I've been using, the Robert Kaufman Kona cottons. I knew that they had them there. I knew that I had all of the ones that I was looking for specifically. I didn't want to have to order online and wait for it to come, so I just wanted to make sure it was like in my town. It was easily accessible with my own body. Then I came home with the fabric and I washed it, and I washed things kind of separately just in case they would run. I don't think they were going to run, but just in case, I didn't want to make my white color pink by washing it with the red, etc. While I waited for Luke and Lily to decide which design they wanted, I did some practice. I didn't think I was going to need to practice, but my mom said practice, and I'm really glad that she did, because boy, did I need to practice. I learned so much. Here, I'll show you some of my practices. So a lot of the quilt design has what are called half square triangles. It's very self-explanatory, but they're HSTs, half square triangles. It's very much like the quilting term for a block just like this. So this is 4 half square triangles all together. When you're putting fabric together like this, it's called piecing. You're putting pieces together. That's like the name of the technique. And when you are piecing, you need to make sure that the finished product is the exact size that you want it to be. Because if you are putting together like a row of 10 half square triangles and each one is a 1/16 of an inch off, that's gonna add up very quickly and ruin how the entire quilt fits together. So making sure that these half square triangles are exactly the size that they're supposed to be is absolutely vital for a quilt that lays flat and you can see all of the points of the triangles. They aren't like cut off on one side or whatever. Any weird things can happen. I did a bunch of practice and they all were terrible. And I was really freaking out because I was following tutorials. I was talking to my mom. I talked to my dad, who is the math brain. We could not figure out why I was cutting the squares fine. They measured okay. And then I put them together and they measured completely wrong. And it was just not making any sense. The only thing I could think after doing all of these and having none of them work was that maybe my ruler was the problem. And so I put my ruler up against a wooden craft ruler that I have, and sure enough, over the course of about a foot, it was losing almost 1/8 of an inch. Wouldn't you know it? Plastic rulers can warp over time. That's an old ruler that was a hand-me-down and then a hand-me-down. So when I went to the quilt store to buy my fabric, I also got not one, but 2 new rulers. I feel very legit now. I had been keeping my old ruler just like standing up in a little basket, and I think that made it warp. They have a hole right there so that you can hang them up. So I'm gonna hang them up on the wall. And now when you see them in the background of my videos, you're gonna know why they're hanging up. Like I said, today's a big day because I'm actually gonna start cutting the fabric and maybe start sewing it together. I'm gonna start just by ironing the fabric and I'll take it from there. Hey Pete, excuse me. I need your bed. But here is how making this quilt changed my life. The process challenged several subconscious and powerful limiting beliefs that I've held for years. Like, I can't do math. I can't manage my time. I can't work hard. And most importantly, I can't get better at anything. Last night, I finished cutting out all of the pieces and all of the squares. The squares are gonna be turned into the half square triangles, which is what I'm gonna do today. And I kind of separated it out into 3 sections of pieces that need to be cut out. So the pieces for all the blocks on the front, the squares for the half square triangles, and then the borders and the strips. So I just did the first 2, and I'll do the borders and the strips when I get to them. That way, if the pieces end up being a little bit off and I need to make adjustments so that I can hit my final measurement, then I can make those adjustments in the borders. Hopefully it won't get to that point, but I just wanted to leave that space for myself. That was my mom's idea. Thanks, Mom. So I'm making half square triangles. Can you go sit somewhere else? So I'm making the half square triangles 8 at a time because that is how the internet suggests doing large amounts. It's more accurate if you do it right, which is why I did a bunch of practice. So it starts with 2 squares of fabric. There's like a chart for how big it needs to be depending on how big you want your finished blocks to be. You put your 2 fabrics together, right sides together if they had right sides. These are just solid, so both sides are fine. I drew an X across the top, and then I'm going to stitch on either side of the X, and then I'll show you how it goes from there. As the quilt started to come together, I understood the power of letting myself be bad at things. Now I've become obsessed with embracing being bad at things, which is just another way of saying I'm actively seeking out things to be a beginner at, which in a meta way I am also a beginner at. I've started running and lifting weights, I've taken on graphic design clients, and I finally opened the Moonbelly shop. All of these things terrified me for different reasons, but I've already gotten so much better at each of them. I'm just finishing trimming all of these teeny weeny little half square triangle squares, and I'm learning a couple things. Maybe I like making quilts like this. This is being really fun. Quilts I've made in the past have been applique quilts. I haven't made a patchwork pieced quilt like maybe since I was a tiny child. Turns out I think I actually really am enjoying this. Like I'm cutting out 120 of these 2-inch squares and I'm having a good time. It's really satisfying. I was thinking, I don't understand how this mat works. Like this rotary cutter is one of the sharpest things I've ever come in contact with. This mat is called a self-healing mat. I don't know, I need to look up how it works because I think it's really fascinating. I am like pushing down with a lot of weight, and I mean that's what this mat is like made for. You can't use a cuttery rotor. You can't use a rotary cutter without it, as far as I know. Like you would just cut your table. You know, this would cut through wood. It would probably cut through even like a hard plastic like this. It would probably make a mark. So I don't know, it's some pretty cool technology I want to learn a little bit more about because it is making this project possible. There's no way I could be this precise with scissors. And that's pretty cool. The light in here is so weird because the eclipse is happening right now. We're almost to the peak of what it's gonna get here in like 15 minutes. So it got really dark in here even though it's really sunny outside. It's like very strange. But I finished all 120 of these little half square triangles. And before I put them together, I'm actually just gonna go right ahead and make the bigger ones. I'm gonna get as much done as I can and then step outside and look not at the sun. And then I'll be back to finish the rest. So yesterday I put together all of the mini triangles that are gonna go in the center section. I put them together 2 by 2 into a big long chain, and then I put them together into these quads. Now I'm just gonna put together the last few pieces that are needed for the center square, and then I can put it all together. It might be from years of ballet class or my family history or simply being socialized as a woman, but I've lived a lot of my life with the subconscious belief that risks are only okay if they succeed. In other words, that it's not okay to be bad at something. Consciously, I believe mistakes and so-called failures are often beautiful, necessary, and powerful teachers, but what we know consciously and what we feel subconsciously can sometimes be oceans apart. I can't believe that it's working. There's this interesting thing that's happening right now where I'm getting like a little sad when every little step is done. So I think I'm enjoying myself. That's nice, a nice little perk. Okay, now I'm gonna pin these together so that I can make sure that the point is perfect. I put a pin through this way where I need the corner to be, which is exactly where I need the stitching to be. Keeping that pin perpendicular to the fabric, I am pinning in the second part of the seam allowance that I will get to. So I'm gonna stitch down this way. So the purple seam allowance, I'm gonna get to second, just barely, but just barely. And then I'm gonna take this perpendicular pin out and it should be good. I'm gonna do that to the rest of them. You can see the point is like pretty much perfect. Okay, now all of the pairs are done and I'm gonna do the same kind of pinning technique to make sure that the center seam on both of them lines up perfectly and it isn't a little bit off. So I'm gonna do that same pinning technique. I need to sew on this side of the pair, but I'm not gonna sew it so that I can see this side. I'm actually gonna sew it so I can see this side. That way I can make sure that my stitching lines up perfectly at this little V, which is the top of the point, and then that way when I open it up it should be perfectly right at the point and I haven't cut off the point or left a little bit too much white there. Lunchtime, I think. Taking on this project felt like a huge risk because I had truly no idea if I could make what I had envisioned in my head. As I worked on it, a few people asked me if I knew how to make a quilt like this, and each time I would answer with a laugh, no. Luckily, the risk paid off and the quilt is an artifact that I am incredibly proud of. I decided to go for a little walk. Just like be outside for a moment, be by the waves before I cut out all of the strips because I'm a little anxious about it. And I thought this would calm me down. And it is very nice to be outside. It's been so cold. I really just have to trust my measurements. Like I have to trust past me that I wrote everything down exactly as it needed to be done. I'm going to leave myself a little bit of leeway as I cut everything. And worst case scenario, I cut something out wrong and I have to go buy more fabric. Or I have to put a seam in one of the borders. Like those are not bad situations. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. I finished all of the piecing for the front. I had to make a little bit of an adjustment because the triangles at the top just came out too short. I don't really know why. I just added this little trio in the corner and I think that it works out perfectly, and if I wasn't telling you, no one would know. Everything else, all of my other measurements worked out perfectly. I am so impressed with myself. I'm so proud. And I just love it so much. I'm gonna take these two pieces now, plus some extra fabric for the binding, for the edge, to a person who has a long arm sewing machine. My sewing machine is just a regular sewing machine. It is not called a short arm, but it basically has a short arm. That means that getting to the middle of a quilt this size, but the quilt won't fit. So I'm taking this to someone who has a quilting machine with a much longer arm so that it can be quilted while it's flat. It's robotic. It's way nicer than I could do myself. The last thing that I want to do before I take this to the long armor is I want to add the embroidery on the back. So once I make the design on my computer, I'm going to gently trace it onto the fabric and then embroider it from there. And then I can take this to the long armor and we'll see how that goes. Well, guys, today's a very exciting day. In just a few moments, as soon as Josh gets back with our car, I am going to pick up the quilt. It is done. It has been quilted and it also has binding on the side, and I'm like very nervous and very excited to see it. There's two more things that need to get done, and I totally could have done these like 5 weeks ago or any time in the past 5 weeks after I dropped the quilt off until now. But of course, I'm doing it now today, 2 days before we leave, because I have no concept of time. The two things that I need to do are make ties. So I'm going to make some little basically bias tape. I'm gonna use my bias tape makers and make a bunch of ties with the scrap fabric. And then I'm going to make 2 hanging pockets for the back to put a rod through, so that at the end of the wedding, I'll take the ties off. The pockets will be there, and then Luke and Lily can take the quilt home and put rods through the pockets in the back and hang the quilt that way. In the past, I've only ever done 1 pocket, but my mother reminded me that this is a giant quilt and that I should do 2 rods so that there can be a point in the center, or at least 2 pockets. They can use 1 rod or 2 rods, however they want to set that up, but just so that there's a place to put a hook in the center also, so it's not just hooks on the side and maybe would like sag over time, or maybe right away, I don't know. It's pretty heavy. After hand sewing the rod pockets on the back, the quilt and Josh and I drove from New Jersey to Brooklyn for the wedding. One of Luke's childhood friends built the frame, and together we set it up. It was so special to finally see it in the place that it was always meant to be. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was super fun and delicious, and the night ended with me removing stitching from the ties while Rihanna sang in the background. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I think this one turned out pretty nice. I think there's 2 things that this video didn't fully capture. One is just how long it took. This took hours and hours. I really don't know how long, and I'm not upset that it took a long time, but it took a very long time. I barely recorded anything and I had almost 10 hours of footage. So if that gives you an idea, I was like really selective with what I recorded. The other thing that I don't think was fully captured is just how many mistakes I made. I made a lot of mistakes. There were a lot of things that didn't go the way that I thought they were gonna go. I had a lot of issues with triangles. There are some forms of triangles that I will never sew again after doing this project, but I just wanted to give you a taste of what this project was like to go through, and also how it affected me. Above all, I am just so entirely, like fully, deeply to my core grateful that I was able to do this project for such a dear friend. She's family, her family is my family, and to be a part of this special day on such like an intimate level was really special. As like a side note and a fully, well, it's not shameless because I have shame about everything, but an almost shameless plug. The reason that there hasn't been a YouTube video in a little while is like I mentioned in the video, the Moonbelly shop opened a couple of weeks ago. It was a big project and a big scary thing. emotionally, and also like technically and practically. I hope to expand the offerings in the very near future, but right now I have started with belt bags, and there are still a few available if you're interested, and you can shop on my website. They're very cute. The bags are fully one of a kind, totally one of a kind. They are 100% made out of upcycled fabric, and they're custom finished, so you can get the strap exactly the right length for your body and put the buckle on whichever side you want. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really hope that you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Until then, big hugs. Bye. Jack. Yeah, I need my chair. Hey, Bubba. I know. You're so cute. You gonna get down yourself? Or are you a princess and I gotta lift you up? Come here. I know I love you so much. I'm gonna put you on the couch real quick.